My name is Zoe, and at 29 years old, I never imagined I'd find myself in this position. After years of building my career as a data analyst in Denver, I thought I'd finally achieved the financial independence I'd always dreamed of. When my sister Brianna called crying about her latest financial crisis, I assumed it would be another small loan request like the dozens before. Nothing prepared me for the moment she looked me straight in the eye at our parents' dinner table and declared, I deserve half of everything you make. We're sisters, and sisters share. The silence that followed was deafening until I calmly responded, Brianna, I think you've confused me with someone who owes you a living. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The roots of this conflict stretch back to our childhood in suburban Denver, where our parents, Harold and Patricia, raised us in a modest ranch-style home. From the outside, we probably looked like a typical middle-class family. But inside our house, there was an unspoken hierarchy that would shape both our futures in ways I'm still understanding today. Brianna, 3 years younger than me, was what our family politely called spirited. What they really meant was that she had learned early on that tears, tantrums, and emotional manipulation could get her almost anything she wanted. I remember being 7 years old, carefully counting the coins in my piggy bank to buy a toy I'd been saving for months. The day I finally had enough, Brianna saw me preparing to go to the store and immediately burst into tears, claiming it wasn't fair that I got to buy something when she didn't have anything new. Within minutes, our parents had not only given her money to buy her own toy, but they'd somehow convinced me that the right thing to do was to use my saved money to buy something for both of us to share. That pattern would repeat itself countless times throughout our childhood. I would work, save, plan, and achieve something, only to watch Brianna receive the same thing or something better through tears and manipulation. School became my escape and my salvation. While Brianna struggled academically and socially, often coming home in tears about failed tests or friendship drama, I threw myself into my studies. Mathematics came naturally to me, and I found peace in the logical, predictable world of numbers and data analysis. There was something deeply satisfying about problems that had clear solutions, unlike the emotional chaos that seemed to follow Brianna everywhere. Our parents' response to our different academic paths was telling. When I brought home straight A's, the response was usually, "That's nice, honey," followed by immediate concern about why Brianna was struggling and what could be done to help her. When Brianna managed to scrape together C's and D's, it was treated as a cause for celebration, complete with special dinners and rewards. Zoe doesn't need as much attention, I overheard my mother telling a neighbor once. She's naturally responsible and does well on her own. Brianna needs more support to reach her potential. At 14, those words cut deeper than any insult ever could. I was being punished for my competence, overlooked because my success came without drama. High school intensified these patterns. I joined the debate team, volunteered at a local nonprofit, and maintained a part-time job at a bookstore to save money for college. Brianna bounced between various activities, never sticking with anything long enough to develop real skills, but always managing to extract emotional and financial support from our parents when each new venture inevitably failed. The college years were particularly revealing. I earned academic scholarships that covered most of my tuition at the University of Colorado, worked multiple jobs to cover living expenses, and graduated with a degree in statistics and data science. Brianna started at a community college, changed majors 4 times, and eventually dropped out after our parents had spent thousands trying to keep her enrolled. "She's just finding herself" became the family refrain whenever anyone questioned Brianna's lack of direction. Not everyone follows the same path. Meanwhile, I was expected to have my entire life figured out and was criticized for any uncertainty about my future plans. After graduation, I landed an entry-level position at a financial analytics firm in downtown Denver. The work was challenging and rewarding, analyzing market trends and consumer behavior patterns. I loved the intellectual stimulation and the clear connection between effort and results.
More importantly, I was finally earning my own money and building genuine independence.
I found a small but comfortable apartment in a converted warehouse downtown, furnished it slowly with pieces I saved up for, and created the first space that was truly mine. No shared bedrooms, no family drama, no walking on eggshells around someone else's emotional volatility. For the first time in my life, I could come home to peace and quiet. Brianna, meanwhile, was living at home, supposedly working on a portfolio for graphic design freelance work that never seemed to materialize. She had a series of part-time retail jobs that rarely lasted more than a few months before she'd quit in frustration or get fired for attendance issues. Each job loss was accompanied by elaborate stories about unfair managers, toxic work environments, or health issues that made the work impossible. The requests for money started small and innocuous, a 20 here, 50 there, always presented as temporary loans that would be paid back as soon as she got on her feet. I just need enough for gas to get to this job interview, or can you cover my phone bill this month? I promise I'll pay you back when I get my first freelance client. I wanted to be supportive. Despite everything, Brianna was still my sister, and I remembered how isolated and different I'd felt growing up. If I could help her find stability and success, maybe we could finally have the healthy relationship I'd always hoped for. So I said yes to the small requests, hopeful that each one would be the last. But the requests grew larger and more frequent. $100 for car repairs, $200 for rent when a freelance client supposedly didn't pay on time, $300 for design software that was supposedly essential for landing bigger clients. Each time, the repayment promise came with the loan, and each time, the promise was quietly forgotten as soon as the money changed hands. When I occasionally brought up the growing total she owed me, Brianna's response was always some variation of hurt surprise. "I can't believe you're keeping track," she'd say, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought we were family. I thought you wanted to help me succeed." Our parents, when they became aware of the dynamic, were entirely supportive of Brianna's position. "She's struggling right now," my mother would explain. "You're doing so well in your career. Sharing with family is what we do." The implication was clear. My success created an obligation to support Brianna's failures. The breaking point came on what started as a routine family dinner 6 months ago. Our parents had invited both of us over for Sunday roast, something that had become a weekly tradition since I'd moved out. These dinners were usually pleasant enough, a chance to catch up and maintain family connections without the daily friction of living together. Brianna arrived looking unusually stressed, clutching her phone and periodically stepping outside to take calls. When pressed about what was wrong, she launched into a familiar story about a client who was refusing to pay for worksheet completed, leaving her unable to cover her car payment and insurance. "How much do you need?" I asked, already reaching for my wallet out of habit. "That's just it," she said, her voice taking on a strange intensity. "I'm tired of asking for little bits here and there. I'm tired of feeling like I'm begging my own sister for help. We need to find a more permanent solution." Something about her tone made me uncomfortable, but I waited for her to continue. "I've been thinking about this a lot," Brianna said, glancing at our parents for support. "You make good money, and I'm struggling to get established in my field. What if instead of these random loans that stress us both out, you just gave me half of your salary each month? That way, I'd have stable income to build my business, and you'd still have plenty to live on." The casualness with which she delivered this outrageous proposal left me speechless. Half my salary, the money I worked 45 hours a week to earn, the result of years of education and skill development, the foundation of the independence I had worked so hard to build. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to say. "Think about it logically," she continued, warming to her theme. "You're single, you don't have kids, and your apartment is small. You don't need as much money as you make. Meanwhile, I'm trying to build something, but I can't get ahead because I'm constantly worried about basic expenses. If we pooled our resources, we'd both benefit." Our parents were nodding along as though this made perfect sense. "It's actually quite generous of her to think of you as a team like that," our father added. "Families should support each other."
The absurdity of the situation hit me like a physical blow. My sister was asking for half of everything I earned, and my parents were framing it as her being generous to me.
To understand how we reached this moment of staggering entitlement, I need to take you back to where it all began. Growing up in the Henderson household meant navigating an intricate system of unspoken rules that always seemed to favor the loudest, most dramatic person in the room. That person was invariably Brianna. Our house on Maple Street was a typical suburban ranch with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a finished basement where we spent most of our childhood playing. On paper, it should have been enough space for a family of 4 to coexist peacefully. In reality, it felt like a stage where Brianna performed daily dramas while the rest of us served as her supporting cast. The pattern established itself early. I remember being 5 years old, carefully arranging my small collection of books on a shelf in our shared bedroom. I had organized them by color, then by size, creating what seemed to my young mind like a perfect system. When Brianna, then 2, woke up from her nap and saw my arrangement, she swept her arm across the shelf, sending books flying everywhere before dissolving into tears. Instead of addressing the destruction, our mother scooped up Brianna and comforted her. "She's just little," Mom explained to me as I stood amid my scattered books. "She doesn't understand that those are your special things. Why don't you help me put them somewhere safer?" The message was clear. My desire for order and organization was less important than Brianna's impulse to destroy. This wasn't a one-time incident. It was the template for how conflicts would be resolved in our family for the next 2 decades. Christmas mornings were particularly telling. Our parents tried to ensure that Brianna and I received gifts of equal value, but Brianna had an uncanny ability to covet whatever I had been given. One Christmas, when I was 8, I opened a beautiful art set with colored pencils, markers, and a sketch pad. I had been fascinated by drawing and had asked for art supplies for months. Brianna, who had shown no previous interest in art, took one look at my gift and declared it was exactly what she had wanted. Within minutes, she was crying so hard that she made herself sick. Rather than explaining that she had received her own thoughtfully chosen gifts, our parents suggested I share the art set with her. By New Year's Day, half the markers had dried out because Brianna left the caps off, and the sketch pad was filled with her scribbles. When I complained, I was told I was being selfish and that sharing was what good big sisters did. School became my refuge because it was the only place where merit actually mattered. Teachers didn't care that Brianna was younger or more dramatic. They cared about completed homework, test scores, and classroom behavior. For the first time in my life, I was evaluated on my own efforts rather than as part of a dysfunctional family dynamic. I excelled academically, not just because I was naturally studious, but because school offered something I couldn't find at home: fairness. If I studied hard for a test, I received a good grade. If I participated in class discussions, teachers noticed and appreciated my contributions. There were no tears or tantrums that could change these outcomes. Brianna's school experience was entirely different. She struggled with focus and organization, often forgetting assignments or failing to study for tests. Rather than addressing these issues directly, our parents developed an elaborate system of accommodations and excuses. They met regularly with her teachers to discuss her unique learning style and emotional sensitivity. I watched from the sidelines as enormous amounts of time, energy, and resources were devoted to managing Brianna's academic struggles, while my successes were treated as automatic and unremarkable. When I brought home honor roll certificates, they were quietly placed on the refrigerator. When Brianna managed to pass a difficult test, it warranted a family celebration. The inequality wasn't just emotional, it was financial. Brianna required constant interventions: tutoring, therapy, special programs, and eventually private school when our parents decided the public school system wasn't meeting her needs. I learned not to ask for extras like music lessons or summer camps because the family budget was always stretched thin, covering Brianna's latest crisis. High school amplified these patterns exponentially. I joined every academic club I could find, participated in debate team, and maintained a job at the local bookstore. These activities weren't just resume builders, they were my escape from the chaos at home. The bookstore in particular became a sanctuary where I could work quietly, surrounded by organized knowledge and predictable systems. My boss, Mrs. Chen, was a retired teacher who appreciated reliability and competence. She often told me I was the most dependable employee she'd ever had.
praise that meant more to me than any compliment I'd received at home. She also helped me understand something crucial. Not all families operated like mine.
In my family, Mrs. Chen told me one afternoon as we shelved returns together, we believed that each child was responsible for their own success. My parents supported us, but they didn't rescue us from the consequences of our choices. This conversation was the first time I realized that the dynamic in my family wasn't normal or healthy. Meanwhile, Brianna was bouncing between activities and social groups, never staying with anything long enough to develop real skills or meaningful relationships. She tried cheerleading, drama club, student government, and various sports, but each endeavor ended the same way: tears, accusations of unfairness, and dramatic exits. Our parents' response was always the same: find the next activity that might finally be the key to Brianna's happiness and success. They never suggested that perhaps the problem wasn't with the activities, teachers, or other students. The possibility that Brianna herself might need to change her approach or develop better coping skills was never discussed. The college application process highlighted the vast differences in our approaches to life. I researched schools methodically, focusing on academic programs and financial aid opportunities. I applied for every scholarship I could find and worked extra hours at the bookstore to save money for application fees. Brianna's approach was entirely different. She applied to expensive private schools based on their social reputations and campus aesthetics, with no consideration of cost or realistic admission chances. When rejection letters began arriving, our parents immediately began exploring expensive alternatives like gap year programs and private consultants who could help her find the right fit. I was accepted to the University of Colorado with significant academic scholarships that would cover most of my expenses. Instead of celebrating this achievement, our parents were primarily concerned about how Brianna would feel about my success. I was actually asked to downplay my scholarships because they might make Brianna feel bad about her own situation. The summer before I left for college, Brianna announced she wanted to take a gap year to find herself and explore her artistic interests. This decision was celebrated as mature self-awareness rather than recognized as avoidance of adult responsibilities. Our parents agreed to support her financially during this year of exploration. That fall, as I moved into my dorm room and began my freshman year, Brianna was living at home, supposedly working on a photography portfolio, while our parents covered all her expenses. The contrast was stark. I was working multiple jobs and carefully budgeting every expense, while she enjoyed a fully funded year of artistic exploration with no concrete goals or deadlines. College was transformative for me in ways that extended beyond academics. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who valued hard work, intellectual curiosity, and personal responsibility. My roommate, Kai, came from a family where achievement was celebrated and excuses weren't tolerated. Through our friendship, I began to understand how dysfunctional my family dynamics really were. "Wait," Kai said one evening as I described a typical family dinner, "your parents actually expect you to pay for your sister's mistakes? That's not normal family support. That's enabling destructive behavior." This conversation was a revelation. I had always assumed that my discomfort with Brianna's demands and our parents' expectations meant I was selfish or unloving. Kai helped me understand that healthy families support each other without creating dependencies or sacrificing one child's well-being for another's. During winter break of my freshman year, I returned home to find that Brianna's gap year had become a permanent lifestyle. She had abandoned the photography portfolio and was now exploring graphic design, funded entirely by our parents. She had converted the basement into her studio, complete with expensive equipment and software that our parents had purchased. The contrast with my own experience was jarring. I was working multiple jobs and carefully budgeting every expense while she enjoyed a fully funded year of artistic exploration with no concrete goals or deadlines. This established the pattern that would continue throughout our 20s. I would work,
achieve, and become increasingly independent, while Brianna would explore, experiment, and remain financially dependent on our parents. Each time I reached a new level of success, the expectation grew that I should contribute to supporting Brianna's endless journey of self-discovery.
Graduating from the University of Colorado with a degree in statistics and data science felt like crossing the finish line of a marathon I'd been running my entire life. While my classmates celebrated with expensive dinners and vacations funded by their parents, I quietly packed my few belongings and prepared to enter the real world with nothing but my education, a battered laptop, and an unshakable determination to build something meaningful. The job search process was brutal, but educational. I spent 3 months sending out applications, attending interviews, and facing rejections that stung but never deterred me. Unlike many of my peers who could afford to be selective or take unpaid internships while living at home, I needed a position that would provide immediate income and benefits. This urgency actually worked in my favor. I was motivated, prepared, and grateful for opportunities that others might have dismissed. When Westfield Analytics offered me an entry-level position as a junior data analyst, I didn't hesitate to accept. The salary wasn't impressive by Denver standards, $48,000 a year, but it represented something I'd never had before: complete financial independence. For the first time in my life, I wouldn't need to ask anyone for money or justify my spending decisions to people who didn't understand my values. The company occupied 2 floors of a sleek downtown building, and walking through those glass doors on my first day felt like entering a different world. My colleagues were intelligent, focused professionals who valued competence over drama. The work itself was exactly what I hoped for: analyzing consumer behavior patterns, market trends, and financial data to help clients make informed business decisions. My supervisor, Mr. Thompson, was a seasoned analyst who had built his career on precision and reliability. He didn't care about office politics or personal drama. He cared about accurate analysis and timely deliverables. This meritocratic environment was everything I had longed for during years of family dysfunction. "Data doesn't lie," he told me during my first week. "People do, emotions do, but numbers tell the truth. If you can interpret that truth clearly and communicate it effectively, you'll never lack for work." This philosophy resonated with me deeply. After years of navigating Brianna's emotional manipulation and my parents' reality distortions, working with objective, verifiable information felt like breathing fresh air. I threw myself into the work with an intensity that surprised even me. I arrived early, stayed late, and volunteered for challenging projects that other junior analysts avoided. This wasn't just career ambition, it was a desperate need to prove to myself that I could succeed in an environment where effort and competence were actually valued. Within 6 months, I had earned recognition for my thorough analysis of a complex market segmentation project that helped a major client identify untapped revenue opportunities. The praise from Mr. Thompson and the client meant more to me than any family compliment ever had, because I knew it was based on measurable results rather than obligation or pity. Finding my first apartment was an adventure that highlighted just how different my approach to independence was from Brianna's approach to life. While she was still living in our parents' basement, surrounded by expensive equipment they had purchased for her various creative pursuits, I was viewing cramped studios and calculating how much furniture I could afford after covering rent, utilities, and groceries. I eventually found a small but well-maintained unit in a converted warehouse downtown. The rent was $1,200 a month, exactly what I had budgeted based on careful analysis of my take-home pay. The space was tiny, with exposed brick walls, industrial-style windows, and a galley kitchen that could barely accommodate one person. To me, it was perfect. Furnishing the apartment became a project that extended over months. I bought a decent mattress first, recognizing that sleep quality would impact my work performance. Then came a small dining table from a thrift store, which I sanded and refinished myself. Every purchase was deliberate, budgeted, and saved for. There was something deeply satisfying about acquiring possessions through my own effort rather than through family guilt trips or emotional manipulation. The contrast with Brianna's situation became increasingly apparent during family visits.
While I was learning to cook simple meals, managing a household budget, and building professional relationships, she was still sleeping until noon, complaining about the lack of creative opportunities in Denver, and expecting our parents to fund her latest artistic inspiration. During one particularly uncomfortable family dinner, Brianna announced her decision to pivot from graphic design to photography, explaining that she had discovered her true passion during a weekend workshop. This pivot would require new equipment, software, and potentially some classes, all to be funded by our parents, naturally.
I sat at the table, still wearing my work clothes from a 12-hour day at the office, listening to my parents plan how to fund Brianna's fourth career change, while I ate a home-cooked meal I had prepared with groceries I had purchased with money I had earned. The irony was staggering, but pointing it out would only result in accusations of jealousy or lack of family loyalty. My second year at Westfield brought increasing responsibilities and recognition. I was promoted to senior data analyst with a salary increase to $65,000 and was assigned to lead a small team analyzing retail trends for a major client. The promotion came with my own office, a small space with a window overlooking downtown Denver, but it felt like a corner suite in a skyscraper. The work was challenging and engaging. I was developing predictive models that helped clients anticipate market changes and optimize their strategies. My analyses were directly contributing to million-dollar business decisions, and seeing the practical impact of my work was incredibly fulfilling. This was the career I had dreamed of during those long nights studying in college. My personal life was also improving. I had developed friendships with several colleagues, particularly Kai, who had moved to Denver after graduation and was working at a different firm downtown. We had standing dinner plans twice a week, during which we would discuss our careers, relationships, and future goals. These conversations were refreshing because they focused on mutual growth and support rather than one-sided emotional extraction. I also began dating Nathan, a software engineer I met through a professional networking event. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally, built on shared values around work ethic, financial responsibility, and personal growth. Nathan appreciated my independence and ambition rather than seeing them as threats or character flaws. This was my first romantic relationship with someone who actually respected my boundaries and supported my goals. The contrast with Brianna's romantic life was stark. She had a series of intense, dramatic relationships that inevitably ended in tears, accusations, and requests for family intervention. Her boyfriends were typically creative types who shared her disdain for traditional career paths and financial responsibility. These relationships followed predictable patterns: initial passion, growing conflicts over practical matters, and explosive endings that required weeks of family therapy sessions and emotional support. During this period, Brianna's requests for money began in earnest. They started small and were always framed as temporary loans. "Can you help me with my car payment this month? A client is late paying me, but the money will come through next week." Or, "I need to update my portfolio software. It's only $200 and it'll help me land bigger clients." I wanted to be supportive, especially since my career was going well and I had some disposable income for the first time in my life. The amounts were manageable: $50 here, $100 there, and Brianna's promises to pay me back seemed sincere. I also felt guilty about my success while she was struggling, a guilt that our parents had carefully cultivated over the years. What I didn't realize at the time was that I was establishing a dangerous precedent. Each successful loan request taught Brianna that I was a reliable source of funding with few questions asked. More importantly, it reinforced the family narrative that my financial success created an obligation to support her ongoing failures to launch. By my third year at Westfield, I had been promoted again, this time to lead data analyst with a salary of $78,000. I was managing a team of 5 analysts and overseeing multiple client accounts.
My apartment had gradually been furnished with quality pieces I had researched and saved for. I had a modest but growing investment portfolio and was contributing to my 401k. For the first time in my life, I felt truly secure and independent. Brianna, meanwhile, had abandoned photography in favor of social media marketing, a pivot that required new courses, certification programs, and networking events, all funded by our increasingly strained parents. Her pattern of expensive starts and disappointing finishes was becoming impossible to ignore, but our family's response remained the same: find new ways to support her journey of self-discovery. The loan requests were also escalating. What had started as occasional small amounts had become monthly expectations for larger sums: $200 for professional development courses, $400 for a laptop upgrade, $600 for a photography workshop that would help her transition back to visual arts. The amounts kept growing, but the repayment promises remained consistently broken. When I finally started tracking what Brianna owed me, the total was shocking: over $3,000 in 18 months. This wasn't small change anymore. It represented weeks of work, careful budgeting, and sacrificed purchases. I was subsidizing her lifestyle while she contributed nothing to the household or her own support. The breaking point was approaching, though I didn't recognize it at the time. I was succeeding professionally, building genuine independence, and creating the stable life I had always wanted. But I was also unknowingly funding Brianna's avoidance of adult responsibility, enabling the same destructive patterns that had defined our childhood relationship.
Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment when Brianna's casual borrowing transformed into systematic financial exploitation. It was a Tuesday evening in March, about 18 months into my career at Westfield Analytics. I had just returned from a particularly successful client presentation when my phone rang with Brianna's contact photo, a selfie she'd insisted I use that showed her pouting dramatically at the camera. "Zoe, thank God you answered," she said, her voice carrying that familiar tremor that preceded every crisis. "I'm having a complete disaster over here, and I need your help." The disaster, as it turned out, was that her latest freelance graphic design client had decided not to pay her for a project she'd completed. According to Brianna, she had worked for weeks on a logo and branding package, only to have the client claim the work didn't meet their expectations and refuse payment. She needed $800 to cover her car payment, insurance, and phone bill, or she'd lose her primary means of transportation and communication. "I know it's a lot," she said, tears evident in her voice, "but this client really screwed me over. I have other projects coming up, and I'll be able to pay you back within 2 weeks. I swear, Zoe, this is the last time I'll need to ask for something this big." $800 was more than I'd ever lent her before, but her story seemed legitimate, and I had recently received a performance bonus that made the amount manageable. More importantly, I could hear genuine desperation in her voice. If she really had been cheated out of payment for completed work, then helping her seemed like the right thing to do. "Okay," I said, already mentally adjusting my monthly budget. "I can transfer it tonight, but Brianna, you have to pay me back when you said you would. I'm trying to save for a new car, and this really impacts my plans." "Of course. God, Zoe, you're literally saving my life right now. I promise you, you'll have every penny back in 2 weeks. This client situation is just temporary. I have 3 other projects starting next month." I made the transfer that evening, adding a note to my personal finance spreadsheet about the loan and expected repayment date. 2 weeks came and went without any mention of repayment from Brianna. When I finally brought it up during a family dinner, her response was a masterclass in deflection and guilt manipulation. "Oh, the repayment," she said, looking genuinely surprised that I'd mentioned it. "Those other projects I mentioned got delayed because the clients wanted revisions to the proposals. But they're definitely happening. I just need a few more weeks to get the cash flow sorted out." Our parents immediately jumped to her defense. "These things take time in creative fields," our father explained to me, as though I were a child who didn't understand how business worked.
She can't control when clients make decisions. Be patient with her. The few more weeks stretched into 2 months, during which Brianna made no mention of the debt and began treating my financial support as an established resource rather than a temporary favor. She would casually mention expensive purchases, new design software, professional photography equipment, a weekend workshop in Boulder, while owing me nearly $1,000. What bothered me wasn't just the money, though that was significant. It was the complete lack of acknowledgement that she owed me anything, combined with her continued spending on non-essential items. If she truly couldn't afford to repay me, then how could she afford workshops and equipment upgrades? When I finally confronted her directly about the repayment, her response revealed the sophisticated manipulation tactics she had developed over the years. "Zoe, I can't believe you're being so rigid about this," she said, her eyes immediately filling with tears. "I'm going through the hardest time of my life, trying to build a business from nothing, and my own sister is treating me like some kind of deadbeat. Do you think I want to owe you money? Do you think this is easy for me?" Before I could respond, she continued her performance. "You know what? Fine. If having your precious money back is more important to you than supporting your family, then I'll find some other way to pay you. Maybe I'll just sell all my equipment and give up on my dreams entirely. Would that make you happy?" This was classic Brianna. Transform a reasonable request for repayment into an attack on her dreams and character, while simultaneously making me the villain for expecting basic accountability. The manipulation was so familiar from childhood that I found myself automatically backing down and apologizing for bringing up the debt. Our parents, who witnessed this exchange during another family dinner, supported Brianna's framing of the situation entirely. "She's trying to build something meaningful," our mother explained to me privately. "Your career is stable now. Can't you be more flexible about money with someone who's still finding her way?"
The message was clear. My financial success created an obligation to subsidize Brianna's ongoing failure to create sustainable income. The fact that she was 26 years old and had never held a steady job was irrelevant. The fact that I was working 50-hour weeks to build my own security was also irrelevant. What mattered was that I had money and she needed it. This pattern established the framework for everything that followed. Over the next year, the requests became more frequent and the amounts larger. There was always a crisis, always a client who had delayed payment or an opportunity that required upfront investment. Each loan came with detailed promises about repayment timelines that were never honored. The $800 car payment crisis was followed by a $500 emergency for new tires after she claimed to have hit a pothole that damaged her wheel. Then came $600 for a professional website that would supposedly attract higher-paying clients. After that, $400 for a graphic design conference that promised networking opportunities with major brands. Each request was presented as the solution to her financial problems, the investment that would finally allow her to achieve stability and repay all previous loans. But each solution led to new problems that required additional funding. The website needed ongoing maintenance fees. The conference led to follow-up workshops that cost extra. The networking opportunities required professional clothing and business cards. I began to feel like I was pouring money into a bottomless pit, but backing out seemed impossible. The amounts individually weren't devastating to my budget, and Brianna had become increasingly skilled at presenting each request as urgent and temporary. More importantly, she had developed a sophisticated understanding of my psychological triggers. "I know I still owe you money from before," she would say, "and that's exactly why I need this investment to work. If I can just land one good client, I'll be able to pay you back everything at once, plus interest. But without this opportunity, I'm going to stay stuck in this cycle, and then we're both screwed." The logic was seductive because it offered hope that all previous loans would be justified and recovered. Each new request was presented as additional debt, but as an investment in recovering previous debt. It was a classic sunk cost fallacy, but in the moment, it felt like sound financial reasoning.
Our parents not only supported these requests, but began actively pressuring me to be more generous. During family gatherings, they would make pointed comments about how well my career was going and how much I must be able to save, living alone with no dependents. Then, they would transition seamlessly into discussions about Brianna's struggles and the importance of family support. Your sister is really trying to make something of herself. She just needs some stability to get her business off the ground. You're in a position to provide that stability. The implication was always the same. My success was somehow partially responsible for Brianna's failure, and therefore I had a moral obligation to share my resources with her. This narrative was so deeply embedded in our family culture that questioning it felt like selfishness rather than reasonable boundary setting. By the end of my third year at Westfield, Brianna owed me over $4,000. This wasn't small change. It represented months of careful budgeting and sacrificed purchases. I had delayed buying a new car, postponed a vacation I had been planning, and lived more frugally than necessary to accommodate her ongoing financial crises. The most frustrating part was that nothing had improved. Despite thousands of dollars in loans, Brianna was no closer to financial independence than when the requests began. If anything, she seemed more dependent, more entitled, and more convinced that my resources were essentially hers to access when needed. The breaking point was building, though I didn't recognize it yet. I was growing increasingly resentful of the financial drain while struggling to justify my anger to myself. After all, she was family. She was struggling, and I was doing well. Shouldn't I be willing to help? What I didn't understand at the time was that I wasn't actually helping her. I was enabling destructive patterns, preventing her from facing the natural consequences of her choices, and teaching her that emotional manipulation was an effective way to access other people's resources. The system that seemed like family loyalty was actually a form of financial abuse that benefited no one in the long run.
The transformation of Brianna's approach from desperate borrowing to calculated entitlement didn't happen overnight, but looking back, I can trace the evolution of her tactics with disturbing clarity. By the summer of my fourth year at Westfield Analytics, she had refined her manipulation strategies into an art form that would have impressed a seasoned con artist. The first major escalation came during what started as a routine family barbecue at our parents' house. I had recently received another promotion to senior lead data analyst, bringing my salary to $85,000, a milestone that felt like validation of all the late nights and extra projects I had taken on. I was proud of my progress and looking forward to sharing the news with my family. Instead of celebration, my announcement was met with a calculated response from Brianna that revealed just how closely she had been monitoring my financial situation. $85,000? She repeated slowly, as though testing the weight of the number. That's incredible, Zoe. I can't even imagine having that kind of financial security. She paused, letting the implications settle before continuing. It must be nice to never have to worry about money. The comment stung because it completely ignored the years of work, sacrifice, and careful budgeting that had gotten me to this point. I hadn't been handed financial security. I had built it through disciplined effort. But pointing this out would only make me look defensive and ungrateful for my success. I've worked really hard for it, I said simply, hoping to end the conversation there. Oh, I know you have, Brianna replied quickly, her tone shifting to what I now recognize as performative admiration. You're so disciplined and focused. I really admire that about you. I wish I had your natural ability to succeed in corporate environments. This was a new tactic, framing my success as an innate talent rather than earned achievement, while simultaneously positioning her failures as the result of incompatible natural tendencies rather than poor choices. It was manipulation disguised as compliment, designed to make me feel guilty about advantages I had supposedly been given, rather than proud of what I had accomplished. Our parents absorbed this narrative immediately. You girls have such different strengths, our mother observed.
Zoe has always been naturally good with numbers and structure, while Brianna is more creative and intuitive. Both are valuable, just in different ways. This false equivalency became a constant refrain in family discussions about our respective situations. My career success was reframed as the predictable result of personality traits that made traditional employment easy for me, while Brianna's ongoing financial struggles were explained as the inevitable challenges faced by creative types in an unforgiving marketplace. The practical impact of this narrative shift was immediate and profound. Brianna's requests for money became more frequent and larger, but they were now framed not as desperate pleas, but as reasonable requests for support between sisters with complementary strengths. "I've been thinking about our different situations," she told me during a coffee date in August, "and I realized that maybe we should approach this more systematically. Instead of me constantly asking for help with specific crises, what if we established a regular arrangement where you help me with consistent expenses and I contribute in other ways?" The proposal was for me to cover her car payment, insurance, and phone bill, roughly $500 a month, in exchange for her handling various tasks for me, like grocery shopping, apartment cleaning, and meal preparation. On the surface, it sounded like a reasonable trade of financial resources for personal services. "Think about how much time you spend on errands and housework," she continued persuasively. "Your hourly rate at work is probably $35 or $40 an hour, right? So if I can save you 5 or 6 hours per week, we're both coming out ahead." The logic was seductive because it reframed financial support as a mutually beneficial business arrangement rather than charity. It also appealed to my desire to find a sustainable solution to the constant crisis requests that had been draining my emotional energy as much as my bank account. I agreed to a trial period, hoping that regular support might finally provide Brianna with the stability she needed to build her own income stream. Within 2 weeks, I understood the fatal flaw in this arrangement. Brianna had no incentive to become financially independent because she was now receiving guaranteed support regardless of her own efforts. The services she provided were inconsistent and often created more work for me than they saved. She would buy expensive organic groceries that blew through my food budget, clean my apartment by moving clutter around rather than actually organizing anything, and prepare elaborate meals that left my kitchen messier than when she started. More problematically, she began treating my apartment as her secondary residence, showing up unannounced and using my space for her own activities. She would arrive with clients for design consultations, conduct lengthy phone calls from my living room, and even gave my address to potential dates as a meeting location.
When I tried to establish boundaries around these behaviors, her response was immediate and dramatic. "I'm literally providing you with hundreds of dollars worth of services," she said, tears starting to form. "I'm trying to earn the support you're giving me, and now you're micromanaging how I do it? Maybe this arrangement isn't working if you're going to be controlling about every detail." The threat was clear. Criticize her performance or set boundaries around the arrangement, and she would withdraw her services while continuing to expect financial support. This was emotional blackmail disguised as professional negotiation. Our parents, when they became aware of the tension, sided entirely with Brianna's perspective. "She's trying to contribute in her own way," our father explained to me. "You can't expect her to approach things exactly like you would. Give her some flexibility to find her own methods." This pattern continued for 3 months, during which I was essentially paying $500 per month for the privilege of having my boundaries violated and my living space invaded. The breaking point came when I discovered that Brianna had been using my apartment for overnight stays with her boyfriend Marcus, a struggling musician who shared her disdain for traditional employment. I came home from a business trip to find evidence of their presence throughout my apartment: unfamiliar toiletries in my bathroom, different foods in my refrigerator, and my spare bedroom clearly used for sleeping. When I confronted Brianna, her response revealed the depth of her entitlement. "Marcus needed a place to crash for a few nights while his roommate situation got sorted out," she explained casually. "I didn't think you'd mind since you weren't even here. We were actually doing you a favor by keeping the place occupied and secure." The casual violation of my privacy and property was staggering, but her ability to reframe it as a favor demonstrated the sophisticated psychological manipulation she had developed. According to her logic, allowing her boyfriend to essentially move into my apartment temporarily was something I should be grateful for. When I terminated the service arrangement and returned to the previous system of crisis-based loans, Brianna's response was swift and calculated. She began involving our extended family in her narrative, reaching out to aunts, uncles, and cousins to share her version of our financial dynamic. According to the stories she told, I was a successful sister who had become stingy and controlling about money, unwilling to help family members who were struggling. She carefully omitted details about the thousands of dollars in unpaid loans, the violated boundaries, and the entitled behavior. Instead, she positioned herself as a creative person being punished for not conforming to traditional career expectations. This campaign was effective because it leveraged our extended family's existing assumptions about birth order and personality differences. They had always seen me as the responsible, serious one, and Brianna as the free-spirited, artistic one. Her framing of our conflict fit neatly into these pre-existing narratives. The pressure from extended family members was subtle but persistent. During holiday gatherings, I would receive gentle lectures about the importance of supporting creative family members and not letting success change my values. These conversations were never direct confrontations, but rather concerned observations about family dynamics and generosity. Your sister speaks so highly of your success. It's wonderful that you've done so well for yourself. I'm sure you're able to help her navigate some of the challenges that come with artistic pursuits. The implication was always the same. My success created an obligation to support Brianna's continued failure to generate sustainable income. The fact that I had already provided thousands of dollars in support was irrelevant because the family narrative focused on my current resources rather than my past generosity. By winter, Brianna had escalated to making direct comparisons between our lifestyles during family gatherings. She would comment on my clothing, apartment furnishings, or vacation plans in ways that highlighted the disparity in our financial situations. Zoe's new coat is gorgeous. I can't remember the last time I was able to buy something that nice for myself, but that's the difference between having a steady salary and trying to build a creative business. These comments served multiple purposes. They reminded everyone of our different financial positions, positioned her struggles as the result of noble artistic pursuit rather than poor planning, and created subtle pressure for me to address the disparity through financial support. The manipulation had become so sophisticated that I began questioning my own perceptions and reactions. Was I being unreasonably stingy with someone who was genuinely struggling? Was my success creating legitimate obligations to support family members? Was my frustration with Brianna's behavior actually selfishness disguised as boundary setting? This self-doubt was exactly what Brianna had been cultivating through months of careful psychological manipulation. By the time she made her ultimate demand for half my salary, the groundwork had been laid for me to question whether refusing such a request made me a bad sister and person.
The Sunday dinner that would change everything started innocuously enough. Our parents had invited both Brianna and me over for what they called a family planning session, a euphemism I should have recognized as a red flag. Harold was grilling chicken in the backyard while Patricia bustled around the kitchen preparing side dishes with the nervous energy that always preceded important family discussions. Brianna arrived 30 minutes late, as was her custom, carrying a leather portfolio that she placed ceremoniously on the dining room table. She looked unusually put together, wearing a blazer I'd never seen before and sporting a confident expression that immediately made me uneasy. This wasn't the scattered, crisis-prone sister I'd grown accustomed to supporting. This was someone who had clearly prepared for a performance. "Sorry I'm late," she announced, not sounding sorry at all. "I was putting the finishing touches on something important that I want to share with everyone tonight." Our parents exchanged knowing glances, and I realized with growing dread that whatever Brianna had planned, they were already aware of it. This wasn't going to be a casual family dinner. It was going to be an intervention with me as the unwitting target. We made it through the appetizers and main course with relatively normal conversation about work, weather, and local news.
but I could feel the tension building as Brianna kept checking her phone and our parents kept steering the conversation toward topics like family loyalty, financial responsibility, and the importance of supporting each other through difficult times. As our mother served dessert, my childhood favorite chocolate cake, which felt manipulative in hindsight, Brianna finally revealed the purpose of the evening. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about our family dynamic, specifically about how we can work together more effectively to ensure everyone's success and happiness. She had created an actual PowerPoint presentation, complete with charts and graphs analyzing our family's financial situation. The first slide showed our respective incomes, my $85,000 salary prominently displayed next to her estimated annual earnings of $12,000 from sporadic freelance work. As you can see, she continued in a tone that suggested she was delivering a professional business proposal, there's a significant imbalance in our household resources. While Zoe has achieved remarkable financial stability, I'm still struggling to establish consistent income streams in the creative industry. The clinical language couldn't disguise what was essentially a presentation about why I should give her money, but the formal approach was clearly designed to make her request seem reasonable and well-researched, rather than entitled and manipulative. The next slide broke down our respective expenses, though I noticed immediately that her calculations included several questionable items. According to her analysis, her monthly costs for professional development and creative materials were nearly as high as my rent payment. She had somehow categorized expensive restaurant meals as networking expenses and weekend trips to Boulder as artistic inspiration retreats. The current system of crisis-based financial requests isn't working for anyone, she explained, clicking to the next slide. It creates stress for Zoe because the requests are unpredictable, and it creates anxiety for me because I never know if support will be available when I need it. Our parents were nodding along as though this analysis made perfect sense. I sat in stunned silence, watching my sister present a business case for why I should subsidize her lifestyle permanently rather than occasionally. So, I've developed what I think is a much more equitable and sustainable solution. Brianna continued, her voice gaining confidence as she reached the climax of her presentation. Instead of the current ad hoc system, I propose that we formalize a resource-sharing arrangement where Zoe contributes 50% of her monthly salary to a shared account that I would manage to cover my expenses. The words hit me like a physical blow. 50% of my salary? Half of everything I worked for 45 hours a week? The money I had budgeted for rent, groceries, savings, and the modest luxuries I'd finally been able to afford after years of careful financial planning. 50%? I managed to say, my voice barely audible. I know it sounds like a lot, Brianna replied quickly, but think about it logically. You're single, you don't have dependents, and your lifestyle is quite modest. You could easily live on $42,000 a year, which is still more than many people make. Meanwhile, that support would completely transform my ability to focus on building my creative business without the constant stress of financial insecurity. The audacity was breathtaking. She had calculated exactly how much money she thought I needed to survive and decided that everything above that amount should belong to her. According to her logic, my financial success had created an obligation to fund her continued avoidance of steady employment.
But that's not how siblings work, I protested weakly. People don't just give half their income to family members. Actually, our father interjected, in many cultures, extended families do pool resources to ensure everyone's success. It's only in individualistic Western society that we expect people to struggle alone instead of supporting each other. This was a new argument. Cultural relativism deployed to make Brianna's outrageous demand seem like enlightened family cooperation rather than financial exploitation. Our father, who had never shown interest in other cultures' family structures before, was suddenly an expert on communal resource sharing. The beautiful thing about this arrangement, Brianna continued, is that it benefits both of us. You get to focus entirely on your career without worrying about family financial stress, and I get the stability I need to really invest in building something meaningful. Once my creative business takes off, which it will with proper support, I'll be able to contribute back to the shared resources.
The promise of future reciprocation was the final manipulation tactic, offering hope that this wouldn't be permanent charity, but rather a temporary investment in our mutual success. Of course, there was no timeline for when this reciprocation might occur, no concrete benchmarks for measuring the success of her creative business, and no accountability measures if the arrangement didn't produce the promised results. I've even researched the tax implications, she added, producing additional printouts. If we structure this as a family partnership, there might be advantages for both of us. I could potentially count some of my creative expenses as business deductions that would benefit our shared tax situation. The level of preparation was staggering. She hadn't just woken up one morning and decided to ask for half my salary. She had spent weeks researching, planning, and strategizing how to present this demand in the most compelling way possible. The PowerPoint presentation, the tax research, the cultural arguments, it was all part of a calculated campaign to normalize what was essentially a request for me to work full-time to support her part-time lifestyle. Our parents were completely convinced by her presentation. "This is actually quite thoughtful," our mother observed. "She's really considered all the angles and found a way to make this work for everyone." "It shows real maturity," our father added, taking a systematic approach to family resource management instead of just asking for handouts. The fact that this was exactly what asking for handouts looked like when dressed up in business terminology seemed to escape them entirely. They had been so conditioned to support Brianna's avoidance of responsibility that they genuinely believed a formal presentation requesting half my income represented personal growth and financial sophistication. "I know this is a big change," Brianna said, her tone shifting to what I now recognize as calculated vulnerability. "But I really believe this could be transformative for both of us. I'm tired of feeling like a burden, and I'm sure you're tired of the constant financial emergencies. This would give us both the stability to focus on what we do best." The manipulation was complete. She had reframed a demand for permanent financial support as a solution to my problems rather than the creation of a much larger problem. According to her logic, agreeing to give her half my salary would actually benefit me by eliminating the unpredictability of her crisis requests. As I sat at that dinner table, looking at the presentation material spread before me and the expectant faces of my family members, I felt something shift inside me. The months of escalating manipulation, the systematic boundary violations, the entitled demands disguised as family cooperation, it all crystallized into perfect clarity. This wasn't about family support or creative partnerships or resource sharing. This was about a 26-year-old woman who had never learned to support herself, demanding that I work twice as hard so she didn't have to work at all. The silence stretched as everyone waited for my response to Brianna's comprehensive presentation. In that moment, I understood that this dinner wasn't really about convincing me to agree to her proposal. It was about putting me in a position where refusing would make me look selfish and unreasonable in front of our parents. But something had fundamentally changed in how I perceived this dynamic. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to apologize for setting boundaries with someone who had never learned to respect them.
The silence that followed Brianna's presentation stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. I could feel the weight of 3 sets of eyes on me, waiting for my response to what they clearly considered a reasonable proposal. The expectation in the room was palpable. This had been orchestrated as a moment where I would finally agree to formalize the financial support that had been gradually increasing over the past 2 years. Instead, I felt a strange calm settling over me. The months of manipulation, guilt-tripping, and boundary violations suddenly crystallized into perfect clarity. This wasn't about family support or creative partnerships. This was about an adult woman demanding that I fund her refusal to take responsibility for her own life. No,
I said quietly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Brianna's confident expression faltered for just a moment before she recovered, clearly having prepared for some resistance. I understand it's a big decision, she said quickly, her tone shifting to the patient, understanding voice she used when she thought I was being unreasonable. Maybe we could start with a smaller percentage. Even 30% would make a huge difference in my ability to... No, I repeated, more firmly this time. I'm not giving you 30%, 50%, or any percentage of my salary. This conversation is over. Our parents exchanged alarmed glances. This wasn't going according to their script, and they immediately moved to apply pressure from their end. Zoe, honey, our mother began in her most diplomatic voice, I think you should really consider what Brianna is proposing. She's put a lot of thought into this, and it could really help stabilize the family's financial situation. The family's financial situation is not my responsibility, I replied, looking directly at her. I'm 29 years old. I work full-time, pay my own bills, and have never asked any of you for money. Brianna is 26 and has never supported herself for a single month of her adult life. Giving her half my salary wouldn't help her, it would enable her to avoid growing up indefinitely. The bluntness of my assessment clearly shocked them. I had never spoken so directly about the family dynamics that everyone tacitly understood but never acknowledged. Brianna's face went pale, then flushed red with anger. I can't believe you just said that, she snapped, all pretense of reasonableness disappearing. I am trying to build something meaningful with my life, not just mindlessly climbing some corporate ladder for a paycheck. My work has value, even if you can't see it. Your work would have value if you actually did it consistently and charged sustainable rates, I replied calmly. But you don't. You take on projects sporadically, undercharge for your time, and then expect me to subsidize the difference. That's not building a business. That's playing at being an entrepreneur while someone else pays your bills. The accuracy of this assessment hit its target. Brianna's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time, I recognized them as tears of rage, rather than the manipulative sadness she usually employed. You have no idea how hard it is to build a creative business, she said, her voice rising. You just sit in your little cubicle crunching numbers all day, collecting your guaranteed paycheck, and judging people who are trying to do something original with their lives. Our father jumped in to support her narrative. There's nothing wrong with taking a more traditional career path, he said to me, but that doesn't mean you should look down on people who choose different approaches to success. The implication was clear. I was being elitist and narrow-minded by expecting Brianna to generate sustainable income from her work. According to their logic, my success in a traditional career created an obligation to fund her experiments in non-traditional careers, regardless of their viability or her commitment level. I'm not looking down on creative careers, I replied evenly. I'm looking at the results. In 4 years, Brianna has never earned enough to support herself for even 1 month. She's 26 years old and has no savings, no consistent income, and no realistic plan for achieving financial independence. At what point do we stop calling this building a creative business and start calling it what it actually is? Avoiding adult responsibilities. The room fell silent at this direct challenge to the narrative that had sustained our family dysfunction for years. I had violated the unspoken rule that we would all pretend Brianna's failures were temporary setbacks rather than patterns of avoidance. Brianna's response was swift and vicious. You know what, Zoe? You're right. I'm not like you. I don't measure success by how much money I can hoard while my own family struggles. I actually care about people and relationships and creating something beautiful in the world, not just accumulating wealth for its own sake.
This was the nuclear option in our family's manipulation playbook. Reframe my financial responsibility as greed and selfishness while positioning her financial irresponsibility as moral superiority. According to this narrative, I was the villain for working hard and managing money wisely, while she was the hero for pursuing her dreams regardless of practical considerations. If caring about people means expecting them to fund your lifestyle indefinitely, I replied, then I'm happy to be called selfish. Our mother gasped at what she perceived as heartless materialism. Zoe, I raised you to be more generous than this. Family is supposed to support each other through difficult times. I have supported her, I said, pulling out my phone and opening the note where I'd been tracking Brianna's loans. Over the past 2 years, I have given her over $4,000. Not loaned, given, because she's never paid back a single penny. I've covered car payments, insurance, phone bills, equipment, software, courses, and countless emergencies that always seem to happen right before payday. The specific number seemed to shock our parents. I don't think they had realized the cumulative total of what I had been providing because each individual request had been presented as a temporary crisis rather than part of an ongoing pattern of dependence. But now she's asking for over $40,000 per year permanently with no accountability, no timeline for independence, and no realistic plan for building the business this money is supposedly going to fund. That's not family support. That's indentured servitude. Brianna's tears turned into full sobs at this point. I can't believe my own sister thinks so little of me. I can't believe you think I'm trying to take advantage of you. I just want a chance to prove what I can do without constantly worrying about money. The performance was masterful, shifting from anger to heartbreak, positioning herself as the wounded party who had been misunderstood and judged harshly by an unsympathetic sister. It was designed to make me feel guilty for setting boundaries and to rally our parents to her defense. It worked perfectly on our parents. She's not asking you to support her forever, our father said desperately. She's asking for temporary help while she builds something that could be really successful. Dad, I said, looking directly at him, she's 26 years old and has never supported herself. At what point does temporary help become permanent enabling? When she's 30? 35? When I'm 40 and still working to fund her creative explorations? The question hung in the air because none of them had an answer. They had never considered an end point to the support because they had never really expected Brianna to become financially independent. They had simply assumed that I would continue to provide increasing levels of support as my income grew and her needs expanded. You're being incredibly cruel, our mother said finally, her voice shaking with emotion. She's your sister. She's struggling. How can you just turn your back on family? I'm not turning my back on family, I replied. I'm refusing to enable destructive behavior that hurts everyone involved, including Brianna. Giving her half my salary wouldn't help her build independence. It would guarantee that she never learns to support herself. This was the moment that I realized that our family dysfunction ran deeper than I had understood. They weren't just enabling Brianna's financial irresponsibility, they genuinely believed that her avoidance of traditional employment was a noble pursuit that deserved subsidy rather than a pattern of avoidance that needed correction. The conversation continued for another hour with various attempts to negotiate smaller percentages, temporary arrangements, and modified proposals, but I had reached a point of absolute clarity. No amount of emotional manipulation, guilt-tripping, or family pressure was going to convince me to hand over control of my financial future to someone who had never demonstrated the ability to manage her own finances responsibly. My final answer is no, I said as I stood up from the dinner table. No to the 50%, no to any modified version of this proposal, and no to any future requests for money. I'm done funding Brianna's refusal to grow up. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Brianna's increasingly dramatic sobs and our parents' shocked whispers to each other about how I had become so cold and materialistic. But for the first time in my adult life, I felt completely at peace with a family-related decision.
The aftermath of that dinner began immediately, before I had even made it to my car. As I gathered my purse and jacket, preparing to leave my childhood home, Brianna's sobs escalated into what can only be described as a full-scale emotional meltdown. She collapsed onto the living room couch, hyperventilating and clutching her chest as though my refusal had caused her physical pain. "I can't believe this is happening," she wailed between gasping breaths. "My own sister is abandoning me when I need her most. How am I supposed to survive? How am I supposed to build anything when the one person who should support me has turned against me?" Our parents rushed to comfort her, shooting accusatory glances at me as they rubbed her back and offered tissues. The scene was designed to maximize my guilt and minimize the legitimacy of my boundary setting. But for once, their manipulation tactics felt transparent rather than compelling. "Look what you've done," our mother hissed at me, her voice barely controlled. "Are you happy now? You've completely devastated your sister." I stood in the doorway, watching this performance with a strange sense of detachment. "Brianna is 26 years old," I said calmly. "If she can't handle hearing no without having a breakdown, that's exactly why she needs to learn to support herself instead of relying on other people's money." This observation only intensified the drama. Brianna's sobs became even louder, and she began rocking back and forth while repeating, "She hates me! She actually hates me!" in a voice designed to break my heart and change my mind. Our father stepped between me and the door, his expression more serious than I had ever seen it. "Zoe, I need you to think very carefully about what you're doing here. This decision doesn't just affect you, it affects the entire family. Are you really willing to destroy our family unity over money?" The reframing was masterful. My refusal to give Brianna half my salary was being positioned as the cause of family destruction, rather than her outrageous demand being seen as the actual problem. According to their logic, I was the one choosing money over family relationships, not Brianna choosing entitlement over personal growth. "I'm not destroying anything," I replied. "I'm refusing to enable destructive behavior. There's a difference." But they weren't interested in hearing that difference. Over the next hour, as Brianna's meltdown continued, our parents took turns trying to convince me to reconsider. They offered compromises, suggested trial periods, and proposed various accountability measures that might make a smaller financial arrangement more palatable. "What if she paid you back a small percentage each month?" our mother suggested desperately. "Or what if we set up specific milestones she had to meet to continue receiving support?" Each suggestion revealed their fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. They were still operating under the assumption that the problem was structural, that we just needed to find the right arrangement to make financial support work effectively. They couldn't see that the problem was philosophical. Brianna believed she was entitled to my resources, and no amount of restructuring would address that core issue. I left that evening with Brianna still sobbing on the couch and our parents promising to continue this conversation when everyone was more rational. The drive home was surreal. I felt simultaneously lighter and heavier than I had in months. Lighter because I had finally spoken the truth about our family dynamics, but heavier because I knew the consequences were just beginning. The phone calls started the next morning. Our mother called first, her voice strained with the effort of staying calm. "I spent half the night consoling your sister. She barely slept, she couldn't eat breakfast, and she's talking about giving up on her business entirely. I hope you're satisfied with what your selfishness has accomplished." The blame was immediate and total. Brianna's emotional distress was my fault for setting boundaries, not her fault for making unreasonable demands. This was the family pattern I had grown up with. Whenever Brianna faced consequences for her behavior, those consequences were somehow transformed into other people's responsibility. "Mom," I said as gently as I could manage, "Brianna's reaction to hearing no is exactly why she needs to learn that other people aren't obligated to fund her choices. A healthy adult doesn't have a breakdown because someone won't give them money." "She's not just anyone," our mother snapped. "She's your sister. She's family, and family takes care of each other during difficult times." This conversation was followed by a similar call from our father, who took a more strategic approach. Instead of emotional manipulation, he tried logical persuasion, presenting various scenarios where successful family members had supported struggling relatives until those relatives achieved independence. "Think of it as an investment in her future," he suggested.
Once her business takes off, she'll be able to contribute to the family's overall prosperity. You're being short-sighted by focusing only on the immediate cost. The fundamental assumption underlying all these conversations was that Brianna's business would eventually become successful if she just had enough support and time. No one questioned whether her approach was viable, whether her skills matched her ambitions, or whether her work ethic was sufficient to build sustainable success. The failure to consider these basic questions revealed how completely our family had bought into Brianna's narrative about her struggles. By Wednesday, the extended family had been mobilized. My aunt called to share her concern about family divisions and to suggest that successful relatives had special responsibilities to help those who were still finding their way. My cousin sent a long text message about the importance of supporting creative family members who were building something meaningful for the future. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Express concern about family unity, acknowledge my success and Brianna's struggles, then suggest that generosity and compromise were needed to resolve the situation. None of them asked for my perspective on what had actually happened or considered whether Brianna's demands might have been unreasonable. The most devastating call came on Friday evening from our grandmother, Patricia's mother, who was 92 and living in an assisted living facility. Brianna had apparently visited her that week and shared her version of our conflict, painting herself as a struggling artist whose dreams were being crushed by an unsympathetic sister. "Zoe, dear," she said in her wavering voice, "I'm very disappointed to hear about the problems between you and Brianna. In my generation, we understood that family was the most important thing. We shared what we had and helped each other through difficulties. I raised your mother to value family loyalty above personal convenience." Hearing disapproval from my grandmother was particularly painful because she had always been proud of my academic and professional achievements. But Brianna's manipulation had been so effective that even a 92-year-old woman with limited information had been convinced that I was the villain in this situation. The social pressure was intense and unrelenting. Every family gathering became an opportunity for concerned relatives to pull me aside and express their worry about the situation. Friends of our parents would make pointed comments about the importance of family support when they saw me around town. Even some of my coworkers, who had heard about the family drama through Denver's surprisingly connected professional network, offered unsolicited advice about balancing career success with family responsibilities. But the most insidious pressure came from my own internal dialogue. Despite the clarity I had felt during the confrontation, the constant criticism from people I loved and respected began to erode my confidence. Maybe I was being unreasonably rigid. Maybe successful people did have obligations to help family members. Maybe my focus on financial independence was actually selfishness disguised as responsibility. These doubts were exactly what the family pressure campaign was designed to create. By isolating me from any perspective that validated my boundary setting and surrounding me with voices that questioned my decision, they were systematically undermining my ability to trust my own judgment. The breaking point came 3 weeks after the dinner when I discovered that Brianna had started a GoFundMe campaign. The page was titled, "Help a Struggling Artist Achieve Her Dreams," and featured carefully curated photos of her work along with a heartbreaking narrative about a talented, creative person whose family had withdrawn support during a crucial period of business development. The campaign description never explicitly mentioned our conflict, but it contained enough coded language that anyone who knew our family situation would understand the subtext. She described feeling abandoned by those closest to her and needing community support to replace the family assistance that was no longer available. The campaign raised over $2,000 in its first week, funded by extended family members, family friends, and people from our community who saw it as an opportunity to support local arts. Each donation came with comments expressing sympathy for her situation and admiration for her persistence in pursuing her creative vision despite family obstacles. Seeing my refusal to fund her lifestyle reframed as community persecution of a struggling artist was a masterclass in public manipulation.
Brianna had successfully transformed a private family boundary dispute into a public narrative about supporting creativity and independence. Anyone who questioned her approach or suggested that she consider more traditional employment was now positioned as someone who didn't value art or creative expression. The most painful part was watching people I respect contribute to funding the exact behavior I had refused to enable. They genuinely believed they were helping someone achieve independence when they were actually subsidizing continued dependence and avoidance of personal growth.
The turning point in my recovery from this toxic family dynamic came from an unexpected source: my supervisor at Westfield Analytics, Mr. Thompson. 3 months after the disastrous family dinner, he called me into his office for what I assumed would be a routine project review. Instead, he closed the door and asked if everything was all right. "Your work quality hasn't suffered," he said carefully, "but I've noticed you seem distracted lately. You're staying later than usual, volunteering for extra projects, and declining social invitations from colleagues. That's usually a sign that someone is dealing with stress outside of work." I hadn't realized how visible my emotional turmoil had become, but his observation was accurate. I had been throwing myself into work as an escape from the constant family pressure and self-doubt that consumed my personal time. The office had become my refuge from the barrage of guilt trips, manipulation, and concerned interventions that awaited me at home. "It's family stuff," I said vaguely, not wanting to burden him with personal drama. "Would it help to talk to someone about it? The company offers counseling services through our employee assistance program. Sometimes an outside perspective can be valuable when family situations get complicated." This suggestion changed everything. I had never considered therapy because our family had always handled problems internally, usually by pressuring whoever was causing disruption to compromise until peace was restored. The idea that I could speak to someone who wasn't invested in maintaining family unity at all costs was revolutionary. Dr. Sara Martinez, the therapist I was matched with through the Employee Assistance Program, specialized in family systems and boundary issues. Our first session was scheduled for a Friday afternoon, and I arrived feeling nervous about discussing private family matters with a stranger. Within 30 minutes, I understood why outside perspective was so crucial. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Dr. Martinez said after I had described the salary demand and family response. "Your sister, who has never supported herself financially, asked you to give her half of your earned income permanently, and when you refused, your family positioned you as the unreasonable party?" Hearing the situation summarized so clearly by someone with no emotional investment in the outcome was jarring. The absurdity of Brianna's demand and our family's response became undeniable when filtered through objective analysis. "Your family has created what we call an enabling system. Everyone's role is organized around preventing your sister from experiencing the natural consequences of her choices. You've been assigned the role of financial rescuer, your parents are emotional rescuers, and your sister has learned that dramatic responses to reasonable boundaries will mobilize the entire system to pressure you into compliance." This framework helped me understand that the problem wasn't my lack of generosity or family loyalty. It was my participation in a dysfunctional system that prevented everyone from growing and healing. The guilt I felt about setting boundaries wasn't evidence that I was being selfish. It was evidence that I had been conditioned to prioritize other people's comfort over my own well-being. Over the following months, Dr. Martinez helped me develop strategies for maintaining boundaries despite family pressure. We practiced responses to guilt trips, analyzed the manipulation tactics I had been subjected to, and explored the childhood experiences that had made me vulnerable to this kind of exploitation. Healthy families support each other without creating dependencies. Your sister doesn't need your money. She needs to develop the skills and resilience that come from supporting herself. By refusing to fund her lifestyle, you're actually offering her the most valuable gift possible, the opportunity to grow and develop. This reframing was transformative.
Instead of seeing myself as someone who had abandoned a struggling family member, I began to understand that I was someone who had refused to participate in preventing that family member's growth and development. The practical aspects of maintaining boundaries proved challenging, but ultimately empowering. I learned to recognize manipulation tactics before they could undermine my confidence. When family members called to pressure me about Brianna's latest crisis, I would listen politely and then respond with variations of, "I understand you're concerned about her, but I'm not going to resume providing financial support." The consistency of this message was crucial. Dr. Martinez had warned me that manipulation would intensify before it decreased, as the family system tried harder to restore its previous functioning. This prediction proved accurate. The pressure campaigns became more creative and intense as months passed without me capitulating. Brianna herself went through several phases of response to my maintained boundaries. Initially, she escalated the dramatic reactions, having increasingly severe crises that required immediate financial intervention. When these failed to move me, she tried anger and accusations, claiming I was jealous of her creativity and trying to sabotage her success.
The most difficult phase was when she attempted reconciliation, calling me directly to apologize for the salary demand and suggesting we start over with a healthier relationship. These conversations were tempting because they offered the possibility of family harmony without acknowledging the fundamental issues that had created our problems. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she told me during one such call, "and I realize I may have been too dependent on family support. I want to prove to you that I can be more independent." The proof she offered was a part-time job at a local coffee shop, which she presented as evidence of her commitment to financial responsibility. However, within weeks, it became clear that this was another manipulation tactic. The job lasted 6 weeks before she quit, claiming the schedule interfered with her creative work, and the brief period of employment was used to justify renewed requests for support. "I tried doing things your way," she said when the next crisis emerged, "but it's impossible to build a creative business while working retail. I need to focus on my real work, which means I need some temporary support while I get established." Recognizing this pattern as another form of manipulation was painful but necessary. Brianna wasn't interested in genuine change or growth. She was interested in finding new ways to access my resources while maintaining the appearance of effort. My parents' response to my maintained boundaries evolved over time as well. Initially, they intensified their pressure campaigns, recruiting extended family members and family friends to express concern about my hardened heart and materialistic priorities. When this approach failed, they moved to withdrawal and punishment, reducing contact with me and excluding me from family events where my presence might create tension. This social isolation was difficult, but ultimately clarifying. The people who truly cared about my well-being respected my boundaries even when they didn't fully understand them. The people who withdrew their support when I wouldn't comply with their demands revealed that their affection had been conditional on my willingness to fund Brianna's lifestyle. My career flourished as I invested the emotional energy previously consumed by family drama into professional development and genuine relationships. 6 months after the salary demand confrontation, I was promoted to senior lead analyst with a salary increase to $95,000. The promotion came with leadership responsibilities that I found deeply fulfilling, and the additional income provided even more financial security. More importantly, I began building a chosen family of people who shared my values around personal responsibility, mutual respect, and healthy boundaries. My friendship with Kai deepened as I became more honest about my family struggles, and I developed close relationships with several colleagues who appreciated directness and reliability over drama and manipulation. The dating relationship with Nathan evolved into something more serious as I became clearer about my own values and boundaries. He had watched my family situation from the outside and consistently supported my decision to maintain boundaries, even when it was difficult.
His perspective as someone from a healthier family system helped validate my instincts and provide emotional support during the most challenging periods. 18 months after refusing to give Brianna half my salary, I received news that she had finally found what appeared to be sustainable employment as a social media coordinator for a local nonprofit. Our parents presented this development as vindication of their belief that she just needed more time and support to find her path. However, my response to this news was different than it might have been in the past. Instead of feeling guilty about not providing the support that led to this outcome, I felt grateful that she had finally been forced by circumstances to develop the skills necessary for independent living. The job might not have been her dream career, but it was a step toward the adult functionality that everyone's previous enabling had prevented. The most profound realization from this entire experience was understanding that love and support aren't the same as compliance and financial provision. I loved Brianna, but I couldn't love her in ways that prevented her growth. I supported my family, but I couldn't support them in ways that enabled dysfunction and manipulation. Setting boundaries hadn't destroyed my family relationships. It had revealed which relationships were based on mutual respect versus conditional obligations. The people who remained in my life after I learned to say no were people who valued me as a person, rather than as a resource to be exploited.
3 years have passed since that life-changing Sunday dinner when Brianna demanded half my salary, and the perspective that time provides has been both illuminating and validating. As I write this, I'm sitting in my newly purchased home, a small but beautiful house in a quiet Denver neighborhood that I was able to afford because I maintained control over my financial resources instead of surrendering them to someone else's poor planning. The house represents more than just a real estate investment. It's a tangible symbol of what becomes possible when you refuse to let other people's dysfunction dictate your life choices. Every room reflects decisions I made based on my own values and preferences, rather than compromises forced by family manipulation or guilt-induced financial obligations. Brianna's journey over these 3 years has been instructive in ways that validate every difficult boundary I maintained. The social media coordinator position at the nonprofit lasted 8 months before she quit, claiming the work environment was toxic and the pay insufficient for someone with her skills. This was followed by a brief attempt to restart her freelance graphic design business, funded partially by the GoFundMe donations and partially by a new boyfriend who was quickly recruited into the role of financial supporter. When that relationship ended, predictably over money and responsibility issues, she moved back in with our parents and cycled through several more part-time jobs. Each position ended with familiar complaints about unfair treatment, impossible expectations, or environments that didn't appreciate her creative talents. The pattern was identical to what I had witnessed throughout her 20s, confirming that my financial support had never been the solution to her problems. The most revealing development came 18 months ago when Brianna finally found stable employment as an administrative assistant at a local medical practice. The job wasn't glamorous or creative, but it provided steady income and benefits. Within 6 months of starting this position, her financial crises largely disappeared. She stopped asking for money, started paying her own bills consistently, and even began saving for a small emergency fund. This transformation happened not because someone finally provided her with enough financial support to pursue her dreams, but because she was forced, by circumstances, to develop basic life skills that everyone's previous enabling had prevented her from learning. The employment wasn't temporary support for her creative business. It was the foundation for adult functioning that she had never been required to build. Our parents struggled to adjust to this new reality. For years, they had organized their lives around managing Brianna's crises and facilitating financial support from various family members. When the crises stopped,
They seemed almost disappointed to lose their roles as rescuers and coordinators. They occasionally still make comments about how Brianna's real talents are being wasted in administrative work, but they can't argue with the stability and independence she has finally achieved. My own life has flourished in ways that extend far beyond career advancement and financial security. Last year, I was promoted to Director of Analytics at Westfield, a position that comes with both significant responsibility and the satisfaction of leading a team of talented professionals. The leadership skills I developed through setting boundaries with my family have translated directly into effective management strategies in the workplace. More importantly, I've built genuine friendships and romantic relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial utility. Nathan and I married last fall in a small ceremony attended by people who celebrated our happiness rather than viewing our union as an opportunity to extract resources or emotional labor. The contrast with family gatherings, where every interaction felt like a negotiation or manipulation attempt, was stark and enlightening. The therapy work I began during the crisis period has continued, evolving from crisis management to personal growth and self-discovery. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that the family dynamics I grew up with had conditioned me to equate love with sacrifice and support with compliance. Unlearning these patterns required conscious effort and consistent practice, but the result has been relationships characterized by authenticity rather than obligation. Perhaps the most unexpected outcome has been my relationship with extended family members who initially pressured me to resume supporting Brianna. As years passed and they observed the positive changes in both our lives, several relatives privately acknowledged that my boundary setting had been the right approach. My aunt, who had once lectured me about family loyalty, recently commented that Brianna seemed much more confident and capable since she started supporting herself. These acknowledgments were validating, but I had learned not to rely on external approval for confidence in my decisions. The real validation came from watching the positive outcomes unfold over time and recognizing that my instincts about healthy relationships had been correct even when everyone around me insisted otherwise.
The financial impact of maintaining boundaries has been substantial, but often overlooked in discussions about family dynamics. The $4,000 I had already given Brianna, combined with the additional thousands I would have provided if I had agreed to any version of her salary-sharing proposal, represents money that I was able to invest in my own future instead. That investment funded professional development courses, contributed to my home down payment, and provides ongoing financial security that benefits not just me, but anyone who becomes part of my chosen family. Equally important has been the psychological freedom that comes from knowing my resources are secure and under my control. I can make decisions about career moves, major purchases, and life changes based on my own goals and values, rather than constantly calculating how my choices might affect my ability to support someone else's poor financial planning. The most challenging aspect of this journey has been accepting that some family relationships may never recover from the honesty and boundary setting that healthy functioning requires. My parents and I have a cordial but distant relationship characterized by careful avoidance of topics that might trigger old patterns of manipulation and guilt. We see each other at major holidays and maintain surface-level communication, but the deep emotional intimacy I once hoped for seems unlikely to develop. This loss is real and sometimes painful, but it's also been educational about the difference between genuine relationships and functional arrangements. The sadness I feel about our limited connection is balanced by gratitude for the authentic relationships I've been able to build with people who don't require me to compromise my well-being as the price of their affection. Brianna and I rarely speak directly, though we occasionally interact at family gatherings with polite but minimal conversation. There's no animosity between us, but there's also no pretense that we have a close sisterly relationship. She has never acknowledged the appropriateness of my boundary setting or expressed appreciation for the tough love that ultimately helped her achieve independence. That's okay. I've learned that doing the right thing doesn't always result in gratitude from the people who benefit from your choices. The broader lesson from this experience extends beyond family dynamics to any situation where manipulation and guilt are used to override reasonable boundaries. Whether in professional settings, friendships, or romantic relationships, the people who respond to no with emotional manipulation, guilt trips, or punitive withdrawal are revealing important information about their character and intentions. Learning to trust my own judgment over the opinions of people who benefit from my compliance has been one of the most valuable skills I've developed. This doesn't mean becoming selfish or uncaring. It means distinguishing between genuine requests for support and attempts to exploit generosity or guilt for personal gain. As I reflect on this journey, I wonder how many people are currently trapped in similar dynamics, funding other people's avoidance of responsibility while being made to feel selfish for wanting basic boundaries around their resources and energy. How many talented, hardworking individuals are being emotionally manipulated into supporting adults who refuse to develop the skills necessary for independence? If this story resonates with your own experiences, I hope it provides both validation and encouragement. Setting boundaries with manipulative family members is never easy, but the alternative, permanent entrapment in dysfunctional systems, is ultimately more damaging to everyone involved. The most important lesson I can share is this: love doesn't require you to sacrifice your well-being, security, or future to prevent other adults from experiencing the natural consequences of their choices. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to refuse to enable their self-destructive patterns, even when that refusal is met with tears, anger, and accusations of selfishness. Your resources, energy, and emotional well-being belong to you. You have the right to share them generously with people who respect boundaries and reciprocate care. And you have the equal right to protect them from people who view your success as their entitlement. Trust your instincts, maintain your boundaries, and remember that the people who truly love you will support your growth and independence rather than trying to exploit your generosity. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.